The first 3 lessons establish the content of the Bible and why the Bible deserves an equal place at the table of philosophy and spirituality. Now we can actually begin to study its message in its context. And while it's certainly worth the effort to just begin in Genesis and go through it in order as written, this series will examine it by topic. And today I'm going to address why the Bible seems so unclear and easily misunderstood, and the common criticisms of the Bible's teachings on who Jesus claimed to be, the nature of God, and why the world has been filled with suffering and death. I've already talked about the fact that the Bible was not all written at once, but spanned about 1,400 years, several continents, and 40 writers, yet it has a unified theme of the creation, ruin, and redemption of the world. So we can't just lift a passage from one part of the Bible and put it into another. It's not always about all people all the time, but we can learn a lot from what applied to other people at other times and in other situations. It tells us about the character of God and what he wants from the people he created. As I wrote in my blog in the post, The Bible, Good, Bad, or a Spiritual Buffet, Christianity hinges primarily on the resurrection of Jesus from the dead. If you've decided ahead of time that miracles are impossible, then stop right here, because there's no point in continuing if you interpret a text through your personal arbitrary presumptions. You may be convinced that the Bible is only meant to be a cryptic collection of esoteric knowledge and that anyone who takes it literally is unenlightened, but you can't prove that. It's impossible to read the Bible using the literal, historical, grammatical method and not conclude that Jesus claimed to be God in the flesh. And the details of this are found at the blog post linked in the description. It's equally impossible to deny that he stated openly his purpose for stooping to our level, to redeem us from the realm of Satan. There's a link in the description also to another blog post that briefly explains what I believe to be the cause of the world's suffering. And that's our ancestors handing over control of the world to Satan. Through no fault of our own, we are born into slavery, but because of what Jesus did, we can choose to renounce our citizenship in Satan's realm and move it to the realm of God instead. However, this makes us enemies of state until we leave this world. So while all the world suffers under the rule of Satan, he has a special level of hatred for Christians as traitors to his rule. But Jesus came to do more than die and rise again. He came to turn religion upside down and to model the right way to relate to our Creator. In becoming one of us, he became the only being in existence to have 2 natures, divine and human. In other words, he's fully God and fully man in one being. So when he speaks of God as his Father, he's speaking as one of us. But when he speaks as being equal with God, he speaks as God, our Creator. Failing to grasp this concept is the cause of endless confusion and misinterpretation. Now, when it comes to the common criticism that the God of the Old Testament is evil and Jesus is good, understand that Jesus himself said and did some things that blur the line. Most everyone is familiar with the incident where he overturned the tables of the merchants in the temple and chased them out with a whip. So the next time someone asks, what would Jesus do? Remind them that rage and violence are within the realm of possibilities. There's also the parable he told of the nobleman who went on a long journey to be crowned king, so he left his servants in charge of his estate. At the end, Jesus has the nobleman saying, "Now as for my enemies who didn't want me to be king, bring them here and execute them in front of me." Who is Jesus talking about, and what lesson is he teaching? The answer is partially given just before the parable. He wanted to correct the presumption that the kingdom of God was about to be literally established since he was on his way to Jerusalem. So the full answer is that the people of Israel were in rebellion against their own God and would not be given the kingdom at this time, but instead would be cast away as enemies of God. So this parable is about the Jews and their unfaithfulness. Yet it still begs the question of why God, which includes Jesus, will eventually cast anyone away. But by what right do we object to this concept, since we ourselves bicker and exclude and judge and condemn people all the time? We know intuitively that someone who harms others has to be restrained in order to avoid further harm, and that many, if not most, of those who do harm never change their ways. What kind of decent person would not feel rage at someone who tortures or kills a child or animal, or at those who ruin the whole world with their war and poisoning the earth? It would be far worse a crime for us not to feel rage against them or do anything to stop them. So why can't God feel rage at evil? And why can't He, our Creator who gave us life, have the exclusive right to take it away? If some people think they have the right to harm others, then we who have the ability to stop them must act. And if we fail to act, not only are we just as guilty, but we also expose our own double standards against God. On one hand, we demand that He intervenes and micromanages so nothing bad happens, but at the same time, we demand that He leaves us alone to live as we please. So no matter what God does or fails to do, He gets judged and condemned. What is He supposed to do? When Jesus returns to the earth, it won't be us demanding to know why He allowed suffering and death, but Him demanding that same explanation from us. He left us in charge of the place, and He will demand an account of what we did while He was away. So what's the proper treatment of those who ruined the world or otherwise harmed others? And what's about those who blamed Him for all this? So look again at that parable Jesus told and ask yourself whether Jesus and or God is teaching something evil. As for the Old Testament, Bible critics have gleefully cherry-picked every incident where they have judged God to be guilty of sin, and you can find plenty of websites and videos dedicated to this hate fest. They have judged their Creator without a trial, without giving Him or His followers a chance to speak, and if we try, we're told we're making excuses. But what they don't understand is that God never spoon-feeds people or yanks them into line except as a last resort. Jesus explained this in His parable of the weeds, where an enemy planted weeds in a farmer's wheat crop. The farmer told the workers who wanted to immediately pull up the weeds, "No, because you might accidentally uproot the wheat. Let them all grow together until the harvest. Then I'll be able to tell the reapers to first gather up the weeds and tie them into bundles to be burned, and then gather up the wheat and put it in my silo." So for reasons we don't fully understand, good and evil must coexist until the end, at which time God will collect His people and put His enemies away from Him. But keep in mind that these enemies actively hate and oppose God. Why would they want to spend eternity with Him? By sending them away, God is giving them what they demanded. Evil can't coexist with good forever, but must be basically quarantined. Otherwise, we show no mercy to the victims of evil and no concern for justice. Who among us doesn't think that those who have plotted the suffering and death of billions of people should be punished? To do otherwise is to pour salt into the wounds of the innocent and trivialize their suffering, because we're punishing them twice while showing by example that the wicked can continue to do harm. We contradict our whole concept of justice and insult the innocent victims when we think it's wrong for God to eventually punish and restrain evil. God reaches down to people where they are. He doesn't instantly correct everything, but from time to time He has put boundaries and limits on wickedness. Remember all this as you read the Old Testament, and by all means read it yourself from cover to cover instead of allowing others to tell you what to think. What I'm doing right now is offering my perspective. What you do with it is your choice. But it's only wise to make sure you've heard all the perspective, pro and con, before choosing. One last point I'd like to make about the character of God is that He has demonstrated His love for us by showing any concern for us at all after our ancestors, Adam and Eve, turned their backs on Him. He could have left us alone to our chosen fate as slaves of Satan, but He didn't. He's made Himself known through the design of nature all around us by sending prophets and leaders from time to time, by coming here Himself, and by ensuring that what needed to be preserved in written form was preserved. He also commissioned those who accepted Him to tell others, which is why I'm doing these videos. Yet many demand more. They demand that Jesus appear to them personally. But if rising from the dead isn't convincing, nothing else will be. How many times do critics expect Him to repeat that? And why is it that they accept second-hand information every day from other people, but never from God? As I've said in other lessons, there's no point in continuing to bash the Bible and the God it presents if you've made yourself his judge and jury and already condemned him without a fair trial. There's nothing to be gained from debating the teachings that stem from these core principles if you reject the core itself. But if they're true and accurate, then there will be ultimate justice and mercy for whoever deserves it. And all it takes to deserve mercy is faith, which isn't much to ask. Faith comes from trusting someone, and you can't trust someone you don't know. So try and get to know God, and the best way to do that is to read the Bible and yourself, and to talk to people who, by their behavior, demonstrate that they not only give lip service to Jesus, but actually do what he says. Ask questions and do your research by yourself instead of just copying and pasting what you find. And I think if you give God a fair trial and actually think through the implications of charges that you might have made against him, you might change your mind. And that's all anyone can ask. Now, the next time, I'm going to talk about what I call dependencies. Basically, the core of the Christian faith is pretty well taught and clear in the Bible. There's not much dispute about that. I mean, Jesus said, trust me, and you will be reconciled to God. But beyond that, there's a lot of disagreement on secondary teachings, but they come from or stem from or depend on basic differences in how a person approaches the text. So we'll look at that next time. Thanks for listening.